Welcome to Tip Top Grow Up Your Business with Metronomics. Join me, Shannon Burns-Susko, and Metronomics certified coach, Ged Roberts.
We'll be talking to business thought leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and business team coaches who have all taken the journey to grow up their businesses to their tip top.
We'll be sharing strategies, systems, stories, and how you can grow your company up at the speed you want.
If you're searching for your path to the tip top and feel your time is running out, then this podcast is for you. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Ged Roberts. Today, I am with Richard Bryan, fellow Metronomics coach. Richard, what are we going to be talking about today?
Thank you, Ged. We're going to be talking about my family business journey from turnaround to eventually selling it, and more importantly, the leadership lessons I learned from my mentor, a man named Frank.
And Frank was the topic of your book, Being Frank.
He was, yeah. Being Frank, real life lessons to grow your business and yourself.
Okay. We're also going to touch on a few other things, some lessons we learned from Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and just your experience as a speaker and keynote presenter. And Richard, you've been a Metronomics coach for a while now, but that's not your whole story. Why don't you take us back to the beginning and just give us a little bit of your origin story? I'm fascinated by how you got to where you are now. It's a great, great story.
Yeah, I'll give you the abridged version, Ged, which is after university, I came to the United States to work for a Ford Motor Company, which involved also training with some dealers in Denver, Colorado and Fairfax, Virginia. And actually looking back on that was just so helpful for what I was going to experience later in my life, because it gave me a picture of what success looked like. I was very fortunate that I got to work with a couple of the best retailers in the United States in terms of Ford dealerships. So that was great. I was in my early 20s when I did that. And I was supposed to continue in the States. I got the distress call to come back and join the family business because my father was sick. He was diabetic, but he also had a heart condition, and he was about to have his leg amputated. And so my mother asked me if I could come and help out in the family business. And rule number one in our family business is you don't say no to your mum. And so I left my job with Ford. I flew home. And in the summer of 19, I joined our family business, which was car and truck dealerships. At that time, we had about $120 million a year in sales, 6 locations, and 400 members of staff, 400 employees. That's the good news. The bad news is we had just lost $3.5 million the previous year. We had a bank overdraft of $5 million. And we were in trouble, real trouble. So it wasn't the best situation to walk into. I'm pleased to say that my father survived his operation, but he never worked full time again. And by the time I was 28, I was running the business. And at that point, I think a lot of people assumed that we were not going to make it because, we were in a pretty precarious state, quite honestly.
That's a big business to be running at the age of 20. It sounds like that's what you grew up with. So you weren't new to that industry or that line of business, but you certainly were new to being a CEO in that line of business.
Yeah, and I understood the nuts and bolts of the business, and I was certainly new to and pretty inexperienced and naive as a leader. And if you think about it for a moment, I mean, I was 28 years old, and we had plenty of people that had worked for the family business for longer than I'd been alive. So they were not necessarily that excited about having a new boss who was 28 and pretty green. But I would say that the one thing I did realize pretty early on is that I could work really hard and make incremental changes and improvements to the business. But our problems were such that I didn't have the experience or frankly, the credibility with our bank or our manufacturer partners and even with our employees to really lead this turnaround. And so I think the smartest thing I ever did was to put my ego to one side and go and find someone to help me. And I was very lucky that I joined a peer group at that time called Tech. It's
Yep.
now called
Vistage.
Vistage. And I was in a Vistage group. I had the biggest turnover or revenue and the smallest profit, and that we didn't have any profit. And I was also the youngest by about 20 years.
Because
But yeah,
that's an interesting one, isn't it? When you came into the business, you'd never been a CEO before, and it wasn't as if you were joining a steady state, profitable business. You were joining a business that was in deep, deep trouble, and at a young age, that's a completely different proposition. Get floated into a steady business. That's pretty straightforward. Get put into a business that is on its last legs, as it sounds like it was. Totally different. So, as you say, the best decision you made was going out and finding someone who could help you.
yeah, and I had a pretty good poker face at 28 because, I was driving a nice car because we were car dealers and wearing a suit, and from the outside everything looked great to those who didn't know, but those close to me, including my wife, knew that it was pretty traumatic, and I'm just so grateful that I listened to my Vistage group, who basically said, "Look, you're making improvements to the business, but you're going to run out of cash before you get there. So you need someone who's been there and done this before."
Yeah.
And so I started out on a quest to find that person, and luckily, I think I found someone who was one in a million. It really was a great fit in that he had a lot of leadership experience. And he'd also been in the same industry, and he'd led turnarounds before. And he was an unusual guy. I mean, his name was Frank, ex-Special Forces with a fine arts degree. So when I'm speaking, I tell people he was the sort of guy that could paint you a pretty nice picture, but if you didn't like it, you knew he could kill you. So he was pretty intense. But he was just what we needed, to be honest.
So you found Frank, you worked together.
Yeah, so Frank and I shared a small office together for about 18 months, got the business back to sort of break even, small profit, had to make some tough decisions, including closing a loss-making truck dealership and laying off 75 people in the same day, which was really hard, really difficult thing to do. To stand in front of them and give them that news was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I think at the time just felt like just a sort of crushing blow, not just financially, but also emotionally. It was really hard. But I know, sort of looking back, that if we hadn't closed that dealership, we'd have probably lost everything, because it was bleeding a lot of cash, and we owned the real estate. So after we closed it, we were able to sell that real estate and pay down the bank overdraft. And then that allowed us the time with the bank and showed them that we were serious about turning things around. But it was not easy, but it was a fantastic education sharing an office with Frank. And he was with us for about 2 years in total, and then he left, and we carried on and grew the business for the next 10 years.
Now, the experience you had with Frank and what you learned from him seems to be pretty profound in your sort of, your formative years as a new CEO of a struggling business, to the extent that you actually wrote a book about it. So tell us a little bit about the book. I mean, were you writing that at the time? Was it a retrospective after the fact? There's no ego there from you, is there? The credit goes to Frank. The credit goes to Frank.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from Frank, but to be blunt about it, without Frank, we wouldn't have made it. The end of the story is that we grew the business. We added 6 new franchises, and then we sold it in early 2008, just before things melted down. So it was good timing. Sold the business, and then we sort of transitioned the family business into commercial real estate, investing in developing commercial real estate. And at that point, my wife and I decided to take a sabbatical, because quite honestly, I was exhausted after not just the turnaround, but the sale process was really tiring and emotionally draining. And so we came to Colorado for what was supposed to be a 12-month sabbatical. At least that's what she told me. And 15 years later, we're still here, but I'm not complaining. It's a great place to live. So we now live here, and we still own some real estate. But my main thing now is I'm obviously a Metronomics coach and a keynote speaker.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So your book is on the shelf behind you, Being Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Being Frank, real life lessons to grow your business and yourself. The one thing I regret is I didn't put a picture of Frank in there. I should have done that because I have a great picture of us together. But to answer your question, it was a retrospective. I wrote that after we'd moved to the US. So I think it was 2014 that I started writing that. It's really a look back with some perspective of the journey I'd been on and the lessons that I learned from Frank and their application. I think there's 28 different leadership lessons listed at the back of the book. But yeah, I learned a terrific amount from him. One of the things I loved best about Frank was how he was so calm under massive pressure, and he knew exactly when to introduce a bit of humor just to take the pressure out of things and to get me to relax. Because he said when he first met me, I was in a catatonic state. I could tell you how much money we'd lost the previous month, but otherwise I just didn't know which levers to pull. There was so much going wrong. I didn't know what to do next,
The leadership lessons are a big part of that book. So if you were to pull out sort of a few of those leadership lessons, which ones were the most striking for you?
There's just so many. I like number 2, which is don't let your ego stop you from seeking help from others, because I think that's, the actual lesson is never let your ego stop you from seeking help from others when you don't have the skills or experience required. Find the best talent available to help you. And that's really what I did with Frank. And I think, particularly I coach a number of family businesses, and you see it particularly in family business where you've got someone who's intelligent, but they let their ego get in their way. And they think because their last name is on the building that they need to run everything. They need to make every decision, and as we know, that's not good news, is it? And I've seen that so many times that they're in the wrong spot, really. And sometimes the best thing they can do is to be a good owner and let someone else run the business,
which is not what they want to hear normally, unless they've learned lesson number 2, which is about not letting your ego get in the way. My eye went to lesson number 2 as well. So I was really interested to see that you picked the same one, because ego and CEO rarely comes in one sentence without a joining adjective in the middle, is there? Most CEOs have big egos because that's what got them to where they are. And the type of CEO that I work with is the ones that don't have big egos. They're self-aware. They've got very high emotional intelligence. But that also cuts down the possible number of CEOs that I can work with significantly, because most CEOs aren't like that. They do have egos. They do want to be seen as the person who is in control, that knows all the answers. And it is the letting go that really helps the CEO transition into a much more successful, powerful position.
The other one that just caught my eye is number 7, which is there's not much that can't be decided in an hour if everyone turns up prepared and committed to action. And, something that we struggled with in terms of culture was, meetings that would go on forever. And if you looked at the minutes or the notes afterwards, no one actually made a decision about anything. They were just a complete waste of time and energy. And so, Frank, with his special forces background, was big on team briefings in the morning, stand up, if you want a tea or coffee, bring it with you, because we're going to have a 5 or 10 minute team briefing and we're going to get our marching orders and off we go. And then every week we'd have a managers meeting, and that was hard stop at an hour. And if you turned up and you weren't prepared, you were going to get a hard time. And actually, it's a great that's why when I first discovered Metronomics, I loved the whole daily huddle and weekly meeting and the structure and the cadence of that, because what happened when Frank arrived and we started doing these things is it put a lot of energy and up the pace of the business and decisions. And I remember asking him shortly after I'd hired him, I said, Frank, what's the plan? And he said, well, we're going to make decisions every day and we're going to implement. And as long as we get more decisions right than we get wrong, we'll be fine because we'll build momentum. And I was like, wow, I'm paying him all this money and that's it. But he was right. We built momentum and we upped the pace. And what happened was that the A players loved it and the C players fell by the wayside because it was just too much for them. So we didn't actually have to fire many people because they left. They left because it was like, oh no, I don't want to do this. This is too much like hard work. And whereas before they'd been kind of hanging out and doing just enough to get by. And it was transformational, really.
As I read through the book, I mean, one of the themes that came out for me was this bias for action and decision making over analysis. And if you can instill that in an organization, the acceptance that good enough for now is okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 100%. It doesn't even really need to be 95%. 80, 90 is probably good enough. Now, that's enough to be able to make a decision and start taking action. But there's nothing worse for a business than a business that can't make decisive, quick decisions that people are gonna come on board with. And if you can't build that sort of environment, then be prepared to have a long, hard slog because you're not going to get anywhere.
That's really well said, Jed. And that's exactly the situation we were in because as Frank said, I had paralysis by analysis, really, because I could tell you how much money we lost last month, but we weren't very good at forecasting and looking forward. And obviously forecasting our cash flow was crucial because that was the thing that was going to keep us alive. In the 18 months that Frank and I were working on the turnaround, we did some pretty crazy things to make sure we had enough cash in the business because we knew that was what would kill us actually is if we ran low on cash, the bank or our manufacturer partners would walk away and that would be a disaster. So yeah, it was intense, but it's amazing how some of those fundamentals sort of stick with you really and are really useful when you're working with other clients now because the fundamentals still apply.
Yeah. One of the quotes in the book is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. And I always add the additional one, and this isn't my addition, is cash is king.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think you talked about in the book, you talked about when you went to Cranfield around was probably one of their leadership courses. They're very, very well known around the world. And when you were explaining your business and someone challenged you, if that's not too raw, could you talk us through that?
Yeah, again, that was a recommendation from a peer group I was a member of. By this time, we were profitable and we certainly weren't getting a very good return on investment. So we knew we were going to survive, but now it was about, okay, what do we do going forward to make this a real business in terms of getting a return for the shareholders and making it a viable concern going forward. I was recommended to this course called the BGP, the Business Growth Program. They run it twice a year at Cranfield. They don't market it. It's all by referral. It's for privately held businesses within the UK, and it's a great course. And again, I found myself in a room where I had one of the largest turnovers or revenue and one of the smallest profits, which was quite humbling. When you've got a guy who's got a chain of hairdressers who's making significantly more money than you're like, what am I doing? But there were all sorts of businesses in the room, and it was absolutely fascinating. There were they'd always have alumni come back and talk as well. And we had businesses like Hotel Chocolat, Cobra Beer, and lots of them really who had been through the BGP. And I had the course culminated with you having to present your business plan that you'd put together to a panel. And the panel included faculty from Cranfield, a couple of advisors. I think there was someone from Grant Thornton and there was a banker. And then there were a couple of alumni who were entrepreneurs. So there was about 6 people in total. and you do your presentation, and I got absolutely taken apart on mine, and fair enough, because my plan was sort of global domination. I was going to grow this massive dealer group, and the they said the margin's just not there and the risks are enormous. And do you realize how much money you're going to have to borrow to do this? It's going to be, they said your projections of what you're going to have to borrow are light. You're going to have to borrow a lot more than that. They asked me to go away and reconsider and do an exercise to say what would happen if the market dropped by 20% and you'd done this. And it didn't make for good reading. And that's how I knew, after I sold my business and the market dropped by 40%, I knew that the buyers were going to be in intensive care. And thankfully, they survived, because not only were they my biggest tenant, but they also employed all my old staff. So I wanted them to do well. They survived, thankfully, but it was rough, and that was all about cash and all about me underestimating how much cash I would need to do my plan. And so we switched to a more of a sort of margin and profit maximization and growing a business that I could sell. And that's what I did. And it took us, we said it was going to be 10 years. I think we ended up selling it in 8. But at the back of our minds, we always had that, we're growing a business we can sell. So we're going to run it lean and mean, and we're going to make sure that we're getting rid of all the family expenses and all those things that were find in 100-year-old family business where everyone's got a car and all that sort of stuff that we had to tidy out and say, no, we're not having that attached to business. And that was good, because it did make it a lot easier to sell, because it was much cleaner when we came to do that.
Mm-hmm. And if you hadn't sold at that point, that would have probably been the end of the business. It was only because the two businesses joined, the buyer added your business to their portfolio, which gave them a bit of diversity that meant that they were able to survive. But individually, you'd have probably both gone under. Is that right?
There's a fair chance. I mean, I'd like to think we could have survived, but we'd have been back to drastic measures in terms of cost cutting and running things really lean. And I think the manufacturers in 2008 were a bit more amenable to you having multiple franchises under one roof. And so there were things we could have done, but yeah, it would have been rough.
So, Richard, one of the things that I remember very well when we were together, I think it was in Whistler a couple of years ago, we had a speaker present to us. We spent, I think, probably the best part of a day with Dr. Ben Hardy. Ben Hardy had a big impact on all of us in the room, because his, a lot of his thoughts and a lot of his concepts were quite revolutionary. But there was almost this light bulb moment that appeared to occur for you in that room. And I mean, you felt compelled to sort of, to basically tell what had just happened to you over that experience. Do you feel comfortable sharing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think basically Dr. Ben Hardy was talking about raising your floor, and also using time as a tool, which was a fascinating concept to me, because I was sat there while he was talking, thinking about my wife and I had a 10-year plan. I'm 55 now, I turned 56 in March, and our plan was to continue building our UK property portfolio, even though we live now full-time in Colorado, but to continue with that as our investment. And then when we turned 65, which was our target date, to sell that off and reinvest in the US and have more sort of passive income, and then do more traveling, etc. And still, I'd still be working in terms of speaking and coaching, but we wouldn't have that other business, because we've been active property developers as well, which is, as you can imagine, not just time consuming, but also takes a lot of capital, and takes a lot of emotional energy, because things don't always go to plan. So I shared with Ben that I had this 10-year plan, and his challenge to me was, well, what if you could do it in 3 years? Which I think took a deep breath and thought, and we had a coffee break, and I came back and I said, yeah, I can actually see a way that I could do that in 3 years. And he said, "No, that's great. What's that?" So I explained to him what I would do. And then he said, "Now, what if I said about doing it in a year?" At which point I almost fell off my chair. I remember there was a lot of laughter in the room because I must have looked a bit exasperated. But anyway, he set me this challenge to say, you've now you've shifted your mindset to say, well, actually, I can have all of that now. And then even more focus on my speaking and coaching that I love to do and not have this other aggravation, but have more passive income and travel and do everything now. And that was obviously quite attractive. And so I kept in touch with him, and we had a few follow-up calls, and we sold pretty much everything within 18 months and reinvested in the US. And so it was I didn't do it in a year, but it certainly didn't take us 10 years, which is amazing. So now we have some investments over here, and we just have a couple of properties left in the UK that we're waiting for the leases to expire, and then we'll sell those. We're pretty much done. We don't do any more development. And so, yeah, it's a major shift and fascinating, really. I never thought when I went to that coaching group meetup in Whistler that I would come away selling my entire UK property business. So,
Yeah, because I remember, first of all, the astonishment, and then the energy and the raw energy that came from that. Like, no, yes, I could do this. And yes, it wouldn't necessarily take 10 years. And there's probably a bit of an identity thing there as well. Like, I'm an
absolutely.
entrepreneur, I'm an investor, I'm a developer,
Yeah,
I make things happen, I build stuff. So letting go of that isn't always easy. And, it's something that I find when I go through an exit with a CEO, there is almost as much work in developing what comes next as there is in working out how you're going to exit the business for as good a deal as you can, because you don't want to get to that deal day and the next day, what now? What happens now? What am I? I'm not the CEO anymore. I'm not the owner anymore. So what's my identity?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jed. And I experienced that when we sold the car dealerships because, although I'd been on this turnaround journey that was stressful, it was also exciting. And I was young enough to handle the stress, actually. And I was learning a huge amount. And I had this mentor that, although I employed him, he definitely became my mentor. And then I went from having a clear purpose and mission. And I think probably the most satisfying thing for me with the business was watching people grow, like hiring someone and then watching them grow and surpass what even they thought they were capable of doing. That was a real buzz. And so I lost all of that overnight. And it was really weird because it was the first time in my career that I was lacking direction and purpose. And it's not a good place to be. And so then we started the real estate business, and I think letting go of that, you're absolutely right. It's kind of becomes a bit of a safety net in terms of who you are. And it's not just about the income, it's about your identity. And when people say, what do you do? That you have an answer, because now I tell them I'm a keynote speaker, they think that's not a job. And when you say coach, they also think life coach, right?
That's right.
So it's different, and letting go of that was a bit scary, but it's been fantastic, actually.
So you've now got more time to do what you want to do. You've got less going on in your head. That means you can focus on it. You can enjoy it. And I think one of the last leadership lessons in your book was around life is short. So be intentional about living the life you want to in both your personal and your business life. And if you only make the decision to do that when you hit 65 or 67 or whenever that is, now you just cut the amount of time you have to really, really enjoy and do what you want to do down to probably a maximum of 15, 20 years tops. So why wouldn't you start when you were 50? No, it's just give yourself more time to be able to do that. I mean, you've done that. That's what I do. I coach. I do very, very little else. And that gives me time and space and freedom to be able to travel and do the other things that I want to do in the same way that's what you do.
Yeah, and it's that freedom is liberating, not just in terms of enjoying your personal life and travel, I feel like as a lifelong learner, it's giving me the space and the time to really continue that journey and continue my own development, so that I can better serve my clients, but also it's just so fulfilling. I feel like I'm learning all the time, and I that's what I love about the Metronomics communities. There's such smart people to learn from, that, and with a lack of ego, which is fantastic actually, because there's some people in the community that have done amazing things that are just very laid back about it, which I absolutely love.
It is a very, very, it's a unique community for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Richard, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your keynote speaking, because I think, you certainly have a focus there, a target group of businesses and CEOs that you work with or present to. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I speak to trade associations and corporations, typically at their annual meeting, and of several topics. It's all under the umbrella of leadership, but succession planning is one of them. Business turnaround and business growth are really my sort of main topics. There's a lot of leadership development woven into that in terms of hiring and developing teams of A players. But some of it is from my own journey with my own businesses, but some of it is what I've learned from my clients actually. And the thing is, no keynote's the same because every group's different. And I love the customization because you can be speaking to, all sorts of different groups. And it's a sort of challenge to get to understand what their specific problems or issues are. And then the interaction is fantastic. And I love it, actually. For someone who was terrified of public speaking growing up, it's bizarre that I now do this, but I really do enjoy it. And I love especially the trade associations, because you're talking directly to the business owners of small to medium sized businesses, and they're my people really, because I can sort of empathize with some of the things that they're dealing with. And I think a lot of times, whether I'm speaking or coaching, what is very clear is that it's easy to get too close to your business. I mean, you must see this, Jed, where
Absolutely.
that when you're on the outside looking in, it's so much easier to see what's happening and where the dynamics are maybe not quite working with the leadership team. And that was why Frank was so good for me, because he was looking at it very objectively. And so I think that's part of the value that I bring, whether I'm speaking or coaching, is that I'm holding the mirror up really so that they can really see what's going on and see those blind spots.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes so much sense. And when you're talking, it's not just car dealerships or trade associations in the motor industry. It's broader than that. Is that right?
Yeah, I just spoke to the Packaging Association in Sea Island, Georgia, and I did speak to Napa Auto Parts recently, but Ace Hardware. I mean, all sorts of people really. And Ace Hardware was great because that was store supervisors and managers. And so we're talking about actually real issues and getting them to do role play live on stage, and just so much fun. I mean, you don't have to be funny because the comedy just comes out naturally when you put a couple of guys up and say, "Can you play a problem employee?" They're like, "Oh yeah, I can do that." I've had plenty of experience with them. So
Yeah, I get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
I can see how that would pan out, and that would create a very energized situation, I'm sure, and funny too.
It's fun.
Yeah. So if you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you get notified when future episodes drop. So Richard, from your career, which is varied and really fascinating, if you could come up with one lesson that you could teach CEOs from your career, from your experience, what would that one lesson be?
I think it has to be, don't be afraid to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are. And I mean that both in terms of your team. I mean, when I first started in the family business, I inherited a team that were mostly B and C players, and it was really hard work. When I sold the business 12 years later, we had a team of A players, and I went home and my wife said to me, how did it go today? I said, well, it was obviously pretty emotional, my last day there, but the the amazing thing was I looked around the room and I thought, I am definitely the dumbest person in the room. Like I had just a stellar team. And I think not just, and it makes life so much easier because then you're just being their cheerleader and their coach and mentor and supporting them and removing roadblocks. And you don't have to worry about running the business because they're doing that and better than you could. And the other thing I would say is that really applies to advisors as well. And the quote that I love, one of Frank's quotes, is good advice is expensive, but bad advice is really expensive. And so, when we sold the business, we had fantastic lawyers and accountants. And I'm always saying to my clients who are looking at succession planning, don't skimp on the advice because yes, it's expensive, but you want the best possible advice you can get because in the long run, it's going to pay for itself. And so I think, just having that confidence to surround yourself with people that are really smart, both in terms of your own team and your external advisors, pays huge dividends.
And as you say, you become the cheerleader. You're just doing that. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Awesome. Yep. You set the direction. You set the flag on the top of the hill, and all you're then doing is cheering them along, and they're going to find the best path, the most effective, efficient path to get to that position because they're good at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Richard. Any last thoughts from you before we wrap up for today?
No, it's just been a pleasure hanging out with you today, Ged, and having this chat. So thank you for having me. It was great.